A pleasant day to the viewers. My name is Gabriel Marquez, and our group is tasked to report on the Chapter 6, The Modern Person by George Herbert Mead and George Simmel. A quick introduction to the concept. The focus of the literature is how society is a product of the everyday interactions of each and every individual in the society. It is a tapestry of every insignificant and significant event building up to what society we have as a whole. In this article, it is intensely defined what are the building blocks of the society, how we got to be here, and it offers insights to where it will lead to be. A quick biography of George Herbert Mead is that he was born on the 27th of February in the year 1863. He is raised in Massachusetts, USA. Mead was an American philosopher, sociologist, and psychologist. He's a pioneer of social psychology and symbolic interactionism. His work on the field that he is in is comparable to the works of Dewey, Tesla, Mendeleev, and the likes when it comes to their own fields of expertise. When it comes to social sciences, George Herbert Mead made astonishing strides to push this field of science forward. Leading to the Tears Digest, here is Jimmy Maron to discuss everything it contains.
This is Jamie Crystal Maron, and I'm here to talk about the concept and theory of truth, meaning, action, and interaction by George Herbert Mead. So, focusing on Mead's explanation of the concept of pragmatism, which originated during the American Civil War, and when the United States experienced widespread devastation with many people dying or being injured, this event actually caused many to question their ideals and beliefs leading to the war. They saw how their ideals, which appeared so right and moral, could inflict such damage and harm. It took them half a century to fully recover culturally and gain a fresh perspective on the world. It focuses on practical consequences, emphasizing the need of considering the outcomes of our actions and ideas rather than simply adhering to them. So, understanding pragmatism is crucial because it provides insight to Mead's concern for meaning, self, and the society. He emphasizes the importance of the self in interpersonal connections and the need of the self to act purposefully and socially. Through this, it will allow us to explore different courses of action and thus act rather than react. Furthermore, decisions and ethics evolve from individual consensus and interaction rather than being imposed by the society or prior realities. Aside from that, it also helps in understanding another fundamental concept of Mead, which is the emergence. It refers to the process of forming new concepts from diverse particulars. For him, meaning emerges when multiple components of interaction come together. Consider the hammer example mentioned in the book. While we perceive it as a tool for construction, others may regard it as a weapon for damage. The connotation of the hammer is neither set nor absolute. It is determined by how it is used in different instances or situations. Pragmatism opposes the concept of absolute truth, claiming that truth is contingent on the time, location, and purpose of a situation, suggesting that our view of truth may change depending on the practical benefits of our actions. In other words, truth is neither absolute or constant. Rather, it emerges from individual interactions and behaviors. In general, pragmatism helps understand how interactions generate meanings and how truth is measured in terms of practical advantages. It questions the notion of absolute meanings and truth, emphasizing the significance of social environments and interactions in creating human knowledge. So, human act rather than react. According to Mead, the distinct human act consists of four separate elements: the impulse, perception, manipulation, and consumption. Additionally, the ways in which humans and animals behave differently were discussed. Um, when it comes to acting on impulse, animals typically follow their instincts, but people go through a more thought out process before taking any action. Ernst Cassirer noted that humans have the ability to adapt to our surroundings just like animals do. And both animals and people have two systems: the effector system, which controls how they react to stimuli, and the receptor system, which allows them to sense things. However, humans possess a symbolic system that functions as a link between our sense of reality and our actions based on it. After the initial instinct of or the impulse to act, humans perceive their environment. We tend to look for symbols in our surroundings, like the people or groups of people which we belong. At the same time, we try to find ways to satisfy our impulses. Followed by this, the manipulation of various components in our minds. This is a crucial period before taking action. Through this, we will be able to explore the likely consequences of utilizing various behaviors or actions to satisfy our impulse. And this is where society comes into play because we opt to base our actions on how others will assess them, right? And only then, after everything from feeling the impulse to perceiving and manipulating, after that, humans will finally be able to proceed to act. So, moving on to meaning and interaction, Mead claimed that language is an essential instrument for human survival. It is used to manage and comprehend our surroundings. Unlike animals, humans assess sensory input before reacting. This means that human actions rely on symbols rather than direct actions. Mead also discussed the idea of natural signs and significant gestures. He believes that natural signs are personal and gained through individual experiences. The author of the book presented an example of his dog. He gets really excited when a treat box is opened or when he asks whether it wants a treat. His dog reacted so enthusiastically because it has a particular experience with the treat box. Natural signs are derived from the animal's natural experiences, and their meaning is determined by a structured relationship between the sign and its object. Humans, on the other hand, can make significant gesture or use symbols. These gestures express ideas and emotions that others can understand. So, a gesture gains significance when the ideas underlying it stimulates the same idea or emotional response in the self as it does with others. For example, when you discuss your vacation with a friend, you use language to convey your vacation experience. Human language is intrinsically reflective. Every gesture has a meaning that is specific to the person performing it. Symbols, unlike natural signs, are both conceptual and subjective. Signs are naturally linked to their reference. Symbolic meaning, on the other hand, is not bound by any specific object and can shift throughout time. As Mead emphasized, symbolic meaning is constructed on structured sets of responses and influenced by social interactions. So, proceeding with symbolic interaction, interaction is described as the continuous discussion and melding of individual actions and meanings through three distinct processes. The beginning is the cue. This cue has no specific meaning on its own. To create meaning, you must respond to this indication by establishing an engagement. Alan 2014 gave the example of seeing a friend crying in the school hallway. It was the initial cue. And by asking your friend if everything is fine, you are responding to the cue. The next stage is your friend's response to your question, and the interaction does not stop there. Your friend's response provides a new cue for you to respond to. The process of interacting and creating meaning never ends. The meaning of a situation might vary depending on how individuals interact with one another. Suppose that the friend you saw crying was actually crying with delight because the she got engaged to her partner. You are going to respond by congratulating her. However, if you raise doubt about her boyfriend because you saw him with another woman, the situation would change from joyful to angry and feeling betrayal. It describes how meaning is created through human interactions rather than being fixed. So let's proceed to the next reporter, which is Miss Monteagudo.
Good morning, everyone. I am Donna Viena Monteagudo. I will be discussing George Mead's concepts and theories encompassing the mind, three stages of role taking, society and the self, and the I and the me. Imagine yourself at a busy coffee shop, surrounded by the aroma of freshly made coffee and the vibrant hum of discussion. You can't help but observe the complex dance of social interaction going on all around you as you enjoy your favorite beverage. People add to the rich fabric of human connection by laughing, telling stories, and exchanging gestures. Have you ever wondered, though, what goes on behind these seeming common exchanges? How can we soar through the social complexities of existence and make sense of the world around us? We all find ourselves watching people is a common thing because we see the other as a social object. We are able to accomplish this. People can be objective because they are out there for everyone to see. If I point someone out to you, we can both see them because they are separate entities from ourselves. Furthermore, understanding of that individual is based on social identities and meanings that are objective in and of themselves. But have you ever watched yourself? Have you ever noticed, pointed out something about yourself? Have you ever felt embarrassed or laughed at yourself? Of course you have. Now, how is that different from watching other people? Actually, it isn't. Watching oneself is not different from watching other people. But it is an odd thing. It is easy to observe and point to others as we are the audience and outside of them. However, it is difficult to point oneself, call attention to oneself, and understand oneself as a social object. To do this, we must divorce ourselves from ourselves so that we can understand ourselves as meaningfully relevant as a social object. This process involves understanding of ourselves as a social object. The big question is, how is it done? As we prepare to venture through the fascinating world of George Mead's sociological theories, we will discover how our perception of human behavior is shaped by the interaction of the self, society, role-taking, and the mind. Role-taking is the process through which we place ourselves in the position or role of another in order to see our own self. In every social situation, we make a role for ourselves. Why? Of course, to fit in, to fit and meet the expectations depending on the demands of the situation we are in and to what kind of people whom we are engaging with. Kumbaga, yung actions natin in public is filtered na. Lahat, the way we talk, our choices of words, kung paano tayo gumalaw, lahat yan pili. Depende sa kung sa paanong way natin gustong makita tayo ng mga tao. We are sourcing out our actions. Lahat pili. When socializing kasi, gusto natin na sa ganito or ganyang way of behavior. For example, pagiging mahithin, intimidating, or carefree, tayo ma-perceive ng kapwa-tao natin. So, mag-act tayo as such. Depende sa situation na meron tayo or sino bang mga tao ang kaharap natin. Therefore, Erving Goffman called this process as impression management. Erving Goffman's idea of impression management refers to the process by which people deliberately regulate the impressions they make on others during social interactions. So yun, he saw social interactions as place in which people play different parts and manipulate their actions to show themselves in a positive way. In essence, impression management means carefully shaping one's image to attain certain social objectives or retain desirable identities in various circumstances. Mind you guys, magkaiba ang role-making at role-taking ha. So, ano nga ba ang role-taking? Role-taking is putting oneself in other people's shoes, thinking about other people's viewpoints and understanding and following to establish social roles and standards. It has to do with living up to the standards set by society. Role making, on the other hand, include actively forming or establishing new social roles and expectations, questioning accepted conventions and hierarchies, and presenting new methods to acting, thinking, or structuring social interactions. In a sense, role-taking is a precursor to effective role-making. We put ourselves in the position of the other in order to see how they want us to act. For example, when preparing for a job interview, you imagine yourself in the position or role of the interviewer in order to see how he or she will view you. Then dress or act in the appropriate manner. But take note, role-taking is distinct from impression management, and it is the main way that we are able to form a perspective outside of ourselves. That's the role-taking. Impression management is the conscious or unconscious control of the impressions that one gives to other people in social situations with the goal of looking good and getting what one wants. While role-taking is the process by which people comprehend and take on the viewpoints of others, placing themselves on their shoes, and then modifying how they act to successfully navigate social circumstances. In order to promote social connection and cooperation, role-taking places an emphasis on comprehending and empathizing with others' viewpoints, whereas impression management concentrates on how one presents oneself influences others' perceptions. So again, role-taking is distinct from impression management. And take note, it is the main way that we are able to form a perspective outside of ourselves. Perspective is always a meaning-creating position. For example, ito, American flag. So, sa isang patriotic citizen, syempre, yung American flag, it may symbolize pride, unity, and loyalty to their country. Paano naman sa military veteran? Syempre, the American flag holds deep significance as a symbol of sacrifice, honor, and service. From the perspective naman ng isang immigrant, the American flag may symbolize hope, opportunity, and the promise of a better life, diba? Sa protester naman, syempre, they might view the American flag with skepticism or criticism, seeing it as a symbol of injustice, inequality, or oppression. Therefore, the flag itself has no meaning. Its meaning comes from the perspective of an individual who takes when he or she views it. That's why something like the flag, or gender, or skin color, or ethnic heritage can mean so many different things. So, meaning isn't in the object. Meaning arises from the perspective we take and from our interactions. Here's the important point. Yan, i-relate natin. The self is just such a perspective. It is a viewpoint from which to consider our behaviors and give them meaning. And by definition, a perspective is something other than the object. So in saying that the self is just such a perspective, Mead was implying that the ability to see oneself from the perspective of others is the source of the self. So, to put it differently, our perception of who we are is deeply linked to how we think others see us. Ay, based on my observation, ganito ako i-perceive ng mga friends or teachers ko. So, I will act what I think they thought of who I am. In that way, na-perform ang self. So, the fundamental principle of George Herbert Mead's theory of the self is that it develops via social contact and comes from people adopting the viewpoints of others. Mead pointed out that social experiences continuously form and grow the self, which is not something innate or predetermined. So, in simple terms, Mead's statement underlines the relational aspect of the self, emphasizing that our sense of ourselves is closely linked to the perspective of others and the social context in which we exist. So, in this case, the self is the perspective and the object is our actions, feelings, or thoughts. Taking this perspective, the self is how all these personal qualities and behaviors become meaningful social objects. Precisely how we can get outside ourselves in this way is Mead's driving question. So, yan, mag-i-start na tayo mag-discuss. First off, we will examine Mead's theory of the mind. Picture your mind as a wide landscape filled with an array of ideas, sensations, and feelings. Mead argues that social interaction, in which people use symbols to communicate and make sense of the world around them, is how the mind arises. It is not merely a solitary thing, take note. So, ayan, before the self begins to form, there is a preparatory stage. So while Mead does not explicitly name this stage, he implies it in several writings and talks about it more generally in his theory of the mind. So for Mead, the mind is not something that resides in the physical brain or in the nervous system, nor is it something that is unavailable for sociological investigation. The mind is a kind of behavior that involves at least 5 different abilities. Number 1, to use symbols to denote objects. 2, to use symbols as their own stimulus. Number 3, to read and interpret another's gestures and use them as further stimuli. Number 4, to suspend response. Number 5, to imaginatively rehearse one's own behaviors before actually behaving. So, babasahin lang natin to, and then the next slide will be about the, we will discuss yung, ayan, i-apply natin tong situation na to dun sa sinasabi na 5 different abilities about dun sa mind. So, yan, basahin natin. A few years ago, our school paper ran a cartoon. In it was a picture of 3 people, a man and a woman, arm in arm, and another man. The woman was introducing the men to one another. Both men were reaching out to shake one another's hands. But above the single man was a balloon of his thoughts. In it, he was picturing himself violently punching the other man. He wanted to hit the man, but he shook his hand. Instead and said, "Glad to meet you." So, i-apply na natin yung sinasabing 5 different abilities ng mind. Ayan. Number 1, to use symbols to denote objects. So, alin doon sa situation na yun? So, the picture depicts 3 people, an arm-in-arm couple, and another man engaging in a social interaction. So, paano paliwanag dito? The handshake gesture and the human figures in the picture are examples of symbols that stand in for actual objects and activities. The exchange between the 2 guys is shown by these symbols. 2, to use symbols as their own stimulus. So, in the picture, a thought bubble appears above the head of the single man being introduced. So, in this case, may isip natin na the thought bubble represents the man's inner wishes and thoughts in a symbolic way. So, it gives the man the opportunity to talk to himself internally and see himself behaving violently toward the other man. Number 3, to read and interpret another's gestures and use them as further stimuli. So both men in the cartoon are depicted reaching out to shake hands with each other. So the act of extending one's hand in greeting and goodwill is known as a handshake. The people in the picture show that they are aware of societal norms and customs by reading one another's body language and reacting appropriately. Number 4, to suspend response, not act out of impulse. So, ito yun. Despite feeling the impulse to hit the other man, di ba? The single man refrains from doing so. So, ano to? The single man exhibits the capacity to control his initial urge towards violence. He displays self-control and decides to shake hands with the other man, following societal norms and expectations rather than acting on his angry thoughts. Number 5, to imaginatively rehearse one's own behaviors before actually behaving. So, situation is the single man in the picture imagines himself violently punching the other man before deciding to shake hands. So, the man imagines various possible actions and their outcomes as he practices imaginatively yung bubble talk doon. Because of his mental practice, he's able to weigh his options and decide rationally by projecting potential outcomes. So in the end, he resists his initial reaction and opts for the socially acceptable action of shaking hands. So in a nutshell, there are a lot of things we can pull out of this cartoon. But the issue we want to focus on is the disparity between what the man felt and what he did. He had an impulse to hit the other man, right? Perhaps because he was jealous. Pero hindi niya ginawa. Bakit hindi niya ginawa? Or better to say, paano niya napigilan yung urge na manuntok ng kapwa? He was able not to hit the other man because of his mind. His mind was able to block his initial impulse, to understand the situation symbolically, to point out to himself the symbols and possible meanings, to entertain alternative lines of behavior, and to choose the behavior that best fit the situation. So, the man used symbols to stimulate his own behavior rather than going with his impulse. Right? So, Mead argues that the mind arises in the social process only when that process as a whole enters into or is present in the experience of any one of the given individuals involved in that process. So, take note, Mead is arguing that the mind evolves as the social process, or more precisely, the social interaction, comes to live inside the individual. The mind then is a social entity that begins to form because of infant dependency and forced interaction. So, when Mead refers about the mind arising in the social process, he meant that our brains develop and function in the context of social interactions. So, these interactions with people teach us how to think, communicate, and comprehend our surroundings. In other words, social connection is critical for the evolution of our thoughts. Ayan, another example. Babies frequently cry when they are hungry, weary, or wet, signaling a need for care or attention. So, then the parents must assess their baby's requirements and communicate their behaviors, right? So, now babies begin to mimic their parents' gestures, which leads to language acquisition. They comprehend that their surroundings is symbolic, with hunger represented by Baba and the object bringing it Dada. This enables them to manipulate their environment including themselves and others symbolically. So, reflexive language also enables role playing, which is the basic mechanism by which the mind and self are formed. The three phases of role taking identified by Mead: play stage, the game stage, and generalize others. So, this will be the point of our discussion for this slide. So, consider these spaces as stepping stones towards societal knowledge and self consciousness. Throughout our lives, we imitate the activities of others to gain an understanding of the wider social norms and expectations in adolescence. So this developmental basis provide insight into how our interaction with others help us find our identity. So after a child begins to use language, he or she is ready to begin creating a symbolic self. This happens through three stages of role-taking. So again, the three stages of role-taking are the following: play stage, game stage, and the generalized other. Number 1, play stage. The first is the play stage, and here the child can take the role or assume the perspective of certain significant others. Significant others are those upon whom we depend for emotional and often material support. So these are the people with whom we have long-term relations and intimate self-revealing ties. So Mead calls this the play stage because children must literally play at being some significant other in order to see themselves. So at this point, they haven't progressed much in terms of being able to think abstractly, so they must act out the role to get the perspective. This is important. A child literally gets outside of himself or herself in order to see the self. So simply put, Mead was emphasizing how infants, as they grow and interact with others, learn to understand themselves by adopting the perspective of others. By getting outside of himself or herself, Mead implies that children learn to perceive themselves through the eyes of others. So they start to comprehend how others view them and where they fit in the social sphere. Sa paanong paraan? Ito yun na nga, yung sinasabing play stage. During the play stage, children usually participate in pretend play and imaginative activities. So during this period, children imitate the actions and roles of others, such as pretending to be parents, teachers, or superheroes. Children learn about and assimilate other people's points of view through imaginative play, di ba? Pag naglalaro sila, halimbawa, teacher-teachera, nag-act sila as teacher o nag-act as mother or yung parents, superheroes. So ayan, may situation ulit. A child might play house with one child pretending to be the parent and another pretending to be the child. The child will hold a doll or stuffed bear and talk to it as if she were the parent. As any parent, it's a frightening experience because what you are faced with is an almost exact imitation of your own behaviors, words, and even tone of voice. So, but remember the purpose of role-taking. Notice this isn't role-playing, ha? It is to see one's own self. So, as the child is playing mommy or daddy with a teddy bear, so sino dun yung bear? Syempre yung bata. She is seeing herself from the point of view of the parent, literally. So this is the genesis of the self-perspective, being able to get outside of the self so that we can watch the self as if on stage. So they learn to take on new roles and behaviors, progressively forming a sense of self in connection to others. As the child acts toward herself as others act, the child begins to understand the self as a set of organized responses and becomes a social object to herself. This process of going outside of oneself is critical to the development of self-awareness, and social comprehension. So role-taking teaches youngsters to examine diverse points of view, grasp social roles and expectations, and develop a sense of their own identity in connection to others. Game stage. So during this stage, the child can take the perspective of several others and can take into account the rules, sets of responses that different attitudes bring out of society. But the role taking at this stage is still not very abstract. So what does this mean? So during the game stage, children's role taking abilities are still characterized by concrete understanding and enactment of social roles within specific contexts without abstract generalization to broader societal norms or expectations. So their role-taking skills are still developing, laying the foundation for more complex social understanding in later stages of development. In the play stage, the child could only take the perspective of a single significant other, while in the game stage, the child can take on the role of several others. But of course, they all remain individuals. They all remain individuals kasi the child can switch between adopting the perspective of different individuals, but they do not fully integrate or merge these perspectives into a unified whole. So ito, may example ulit. Mid's example is that of a baseball game. The batter can role take with each individual player in the field and determine how to bat based on their behaviors. The batter is also aware of all the rules of the game. So, in the game stage develops later in childhood when children become more conscious of societal rules, conventions, and expectations. So, during this period, children take part in organized games and activities with defined rules and roles. So during the game stage, toddlers learn to coordinate their activities with those of others and the importance of conforming to social conventions. They understand how their actions and affect others and vice versa, resulting in a greater awareness of social interdependence. Children gain a better knowledge of social roles and connections through gameplay, as well as the capacity to anticipate and respond to others' expectations. In the end, children at this stage can role take with several people and are very concerned with social rules, but they still don't have a fully formed self. That doesn't happen until they can take the perspective of the generalized other. Generalized other, it is this generalized other in his experience which provides him with a self. So, when Mid says that it is the generalized other in his experience which provides him with a self, he indicates that our sense of self is built on our understanding of how others view us and how we fit into the greater social framework. To simply put, our identity and self-concept are influenced by our understanding of societal expectations and standards. For example, when we act in a certain way, we do so because we understand what is socially acceptable or expected in a given context. We internalize the broad perspective of others and change our conduct accordingly. Internalizing cultural norms and expectations allows individuals to create a sense of self and comprehend their place in the social environment. So in here, we will discuss the final stage, which is the generalized other. So that will be tackled in the next slide. Final stage, the generalized other. So it refers to sets of attitudes that an individual may take towards himself or herself. It is a general attitude or perspective of a community. The generalized other allows the individual to have a less segmented self, as the perspectives of many others are generalized now into a single view. It is through the generalized other that the community exercises control over the conduct of its individual members. And up until this point, the child has only been able to role take with specific others. As the individual progresses in the ability to use abstract language and concepts, he or she is also able to think about general or abstract others. So before coming to the stage of the generalized other, people mostly play roles with particular people or important others in their local surroundings, learning and assimilating their viewpoints. But although people get better at using abstract concepts and language, they also get better at thinking about general or abstract others. This change signifies a move away from focusing only on relationships with particular people and toward taking into account wider society, norms, and expectations. It contributes to a greater understanding of the self and social dynamics by reflecting the growth of abstract thinking abilities and enabling people to grasp the collective perspective of society as a whole. May dalawa tayong situation dyan. But mag-focus tayo dun kay George Orwell na lang dun sa pag-shoot niya dun sa elephant. Nakikita naman sa screen, di ba? Basahin na lang natin sa mga utak natin din. Ayan. So, ano ba magiging conclusion ito? We may criticize Orwell for his decision. Syempre, it's always easy from distance, diba? Still, each one of us has felt the pressure of a generalized other. So, ano ba ibig sabihin ito? In a nutshell, the concept of the generalized other relates to people internalized understanding of societal standards, values, and expectations as a result of their socialization. It reflects society's overall perspective kasi as people go through the play and game stages, they internalize the perspectives of others and form an image of the generalized other. They learn to anticipate how society would perceive their acts and adapt accordingly. The generalized other acts as a guiding factor in social interaction, shaping people's perception of themselves and others. It influences their sense of self, morality, and capacity to negotiate complex social contexts. The society and the self. Ayan. Basahin muna natin ito. There could be no society without individual selves. Human society, as we know, it could not exist without minds and selves, since all its most characteristic features presuppose the possession of minds and selves by its individual members. So, ayan. Ano bang sinasabi doon? So, we don't have a self because there is a psychological drive or need for one, but we have a self because society demands it. The self is not something that exists first and then enters into relationship with others, but it is, so to speak, an eddy in the social current and so still a part of the current. So, Mead thought our concept of self does not emerge in isolation but is tightly connected to our relationship with others and the larger social environment. In other words, our identity is influenced by the culture we live in and the individuals we contact with. And ano naman itong tinutukoy niyang term na eddy? So, eddies are currents of air or water that run contrary to the stream. It isn't so much the contrariness that Mead wants us to see, but the fact that an eddy only exists in and because of its surrounding current. So, Mead employs the metaphor of an eddy in the social current to demonstrate how the self develops within the greater flow of social interaction. An eddy is a swirling circulation of water that occurs within a larger stream or river. Similarly, our sense of self evolves in the context of social interaction impacted by societal norms, values, and expectations. So, the self doesn't have a continuous existence. It isn't something that we carry around inside of us. It's a mechanism that allows conversations to happen, whether that conversation occurs in the interaction or within the individual. Ayun, so ano ba isa? So, the self isn't something that has an essential existence or meaning. Like all social objects, it must be symbolically denoted and then given meaning within interactions. And like all social symbolic objects, the meaning of the self is flexible and emergent. So, despite being a distinct entity, the self is nevertheless part of the larger social current. This means that while we have our own thoughts, feelings, and experiences, they are also influenced by and linked to the social world around us. Our sense of self is constantly shaped by our interactions with others and the social environment in which we live. Given that situation, George Mead leads him to see society and social institutions as nothing but an organization of attitudes which we all carry in us. They are organized forms of group or social activity, forms so organized that the individual members of society can act adequately and socially by taking the attitudes of others toward these activities. Overall, in contrast to Durkheim's and Marxist theories, which see society as an objective thing existing independently of individual interactions, George Mead suggests that society is produced through the collective attitudes, symbols, and imaginations of individuals who interact. Society is not a static structure. Rather, it arises continuously from the interactions and interpretations of individuals. It exists as a dynamic and developing network of meanings and symbols that people can choose to use or change in their interactions. So, this perspective emphasizes individuals' active role in shaping and redefining social reality through their interaction with shared symbols and cultural practices. In other words, society exists only as sets of potential generalized others with which we can role take. In a broader sense, it seems that the self is only a reflection of the society surrounding it. But for me, the self isn't merely this social robot. The self is an active process. Part of what we mean by the self is an internalized conversation, and by necessity, interactions require more than one person. And therefore, Mead theorized the existence of two interactive facets of the self, the I and the me. So, the I and the me. The I is the part of the self that is unsocialized and spontaneous. So, it refers to the active, impulsive, and creative aspect of the self. It represents the individual's immediate responses and desires. The me is the self that results from the progressive stages of role-taking and is the perspective that we assume to view and analyze our own behaviors. So, the me refers to the socially constructed aspect of the self, consisting of the internalized norms, values, and expectations of society. It serves as a regulator of the I by influencing behavior in accordance with social standards. The self is essentially a social process, going on with these two distinguishable phases. If it did not have these two phases, there could not be conscious responsibility and there would be nothing noble in experience. Ayan, yung sabi ni Mead. So, ano bang sinasabi niya dito? In this statement, George Mead emphasizes the dynamic nature of the self as a social activity with two distinct phases. In the first phase, the I, the the individual interacts with others and internalizes societal norms, values, and expectations. The second phase, to me, focuses on the individual's reflective capacity, which allows them to analyze their own acts and their repercussions within the context of society norms. So, Mead contends that without these two stages, conscious responsibility, the ability to identify and evaluate one's behavior in accordance to society expectations, would not exist. Furthermore, he underlines that the novelty in human experience stems from the interaction of individual acts and societal forces, emphasizing the interdependence of the self and society. We have all experienced the internal conversation between the I and the me. We may want to jump for joy or shout in anger or punch someone we're angry at or kiss a stranger or run naked, but the me opposes such behavior and points out the social ramifications of these actions. But then again, the I presents our impulses and drives, and the me presents to us the perspectives of society, the meanings and repercussions of our actions. These two aspects of our personality debate till we settle on a path of action. But here is the important part. The I can always act before the conversation begins or even in the middle of it. The I can thus take action that the me would never think of. It can act differently from the community. So in here, the I is free to act in creative or unusual ways, even departing from social norms, in contrast to the me, which represents the internalized social roles and identities created by cultural forces. Mead proposes that the I might behave impulsively either prior to or during a social engagement, adding uncertainty and personal responsibility to the dynamic interaction between the self and society. So, what is the danger? The risk of the I acting beyond social norms or expectations is that social stability and cohesiveness may be upset. Although the I fosters individual creativity and autonomy, unrestrained behavior that markedly departs from accepted social norms can result in miscommunication, conflict, or even social isolation. Social ties and community trust can be weakened by those who repeatedly act in ways that contradict or betray accepted norms and standards. Furthermore, acts motivated only by the I and without regard for the larger social environment may have unexpected consequences or cause harm to oneself or other people. Therefore, even while the I allows for creativity and freedom, it is essential to navigate how to express it within the constraints of society's standards in order to preserve healthy social relationships and the general well-being of the group. There are basic aspects or tools that contribute to our humanity. The mind and symbolic meaning are two of the most significant of them. Symbols and social objects are used to represent and modify the world. Each sign or social item is interpreted in light of accepted behaviors and pragmatic motivations. The mind employs symbolic social items to prevent initial reactions and contemplate alternative courses of action. It is thus necessary for the existence of society. Childhood social connection is crucial for the formation of the mind. Number 2, the self is a lens through which we can examine our own action. This perspective is created by several phases of role-playing and develops into a social construct of our own ideas. So, the self has a dynamic quality as well, as it is the inner dialogue between the I and the me, where the me is the social object and the I is the set of impulses. Society and an integrated self can coexist when the self is capable of role-taking with generalized others. Taking on roles with common people also enables us to think abstractly. Number three, society is not a fixed structure, rather it develops via social interaction. People tend to act rather than just react. The capacity of the mind to postpone reaction and weigh other options in relation to one's essential self and social surroundings is the foundation of action. Hence, the self, the mind, and society are mutually binding of one another. The process of weaving together distinct strands of action is called interaction. In interaction, the triadic relationship between cue, response, and response to response generates meaning. Our understanding of society develops from this negotiated meaning when participants assume roles within given definitions of the situation and institutionalized attitudes. So, that will be the end of my part, and thank you. The next report will be on the introduction to Georg Simmel, to be discussed by Sheila Medrano.
Good day everyone, I'm Sheila Medrano and now I will be discussing the individual in society as well as subjective and objective culture. Now for the introduction to the concept, Simmel brings something important to Mead's idea about the self. Simmel agrees with Mead when he said na yung self daw ay nanggagaling sa kung paano tayo makisalamuha sa ibang tao at kung paano natin intindihin ang mga bagay-bagay with those interactions. But then, he adds that cultural stuff, just like symbols and social norms, could possibly exist both because of people interacting as well as without people. Simmel is curious about how this independent culture affects individuals. And now for the brief biography about George Simmel. Ipinanganak siya noong March 1, 1858 sa Berlin, youngest of 7 children. Yung father niya ay isang Jewish businessman. Started studies history, philosophy, and psychology at the University of Berlin in 1876. Nagturo siya ng philosophy, ethics, and early sociology courses at the University of Berlin from 1885. Published his most important work, The Philosophy of Money, in 1900s. Authored 31 books and numerous essays and articles. Co-founded the German Society for Sociology in 1910 with Max Weber and Ferdinand Tönnies. Offered a full-time academic position at the University of Strasbourg in 1914. World War I disrupted his academic career. And lastly, namatay siya dahil sa liver cancer noong September 28, 1918. Now for the Theories Digest. Maraming sociologists ang naniniwala na kung sino tayo as individuals comes from how we interact with others as well as the groups and systems surrounding us. However, Simmel refused to believe that. Naniniwala siya na ang mga tao ay may default way of being, saying that when we are born, we are already acquiring certain traits and tendencies, and that interactions and anything in our society just shape what's already there. Mostly interested si Simmel sa kung paano naapektuhan ng society and culture ang natural side natin. Para sa kanya, habang sumasailalim sa iba't ibang pagbabago ang society natin, nagbibigay din ito ng panibagong pressure on how we naturally are. Therefore, his theory talks about how modern life builds a culture that is more on society than about individuals, and thus, this affects each of us. Sinabi rin ni Simmel dito na namimit ng isang tao ang kanyang individual needs through social encounters and that these encounters can only be carried out through identifiable forms. These forms, along with culture generally, can become alienating or objective and thus create difficulties for the person. Culture becomes objective and alienating in modernity through such general processes as urbanization. money, and complex social networks as well as institutionalized religion and gender. And now let's proceed sa individual in society. Semmel's main focus is on the individual. Unlike Mead, he believes in an inherent human nature that we're born with. For Semmel, things such as religion and even gender differences are all part of this natural state. He also thinks that individual motive is what drives most of our social interactions. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If individuals and their actions are the most important, how can society even exist? To answer this question, Simmel uses his favorite philosopher, Immanuel Kant. Kant didn't ask if society is possible. Instead, he questioned kung paano natin maiintindihan ang nature as something that is separated from ourselves. Kant also argued that our minds puts up the world in a certain way, creating things such as objects of experience. In-apply ni Simmel yung idea na ito sa society, trying to find the underlying conditions for its existence. Simmel's approach is different from seeing society as a machine or organism. He wants to preserve the individual's importance while recognizing society's power. He says society exists through forms created by human interactions, wherein his forms like roles and norms are the basic conditions of society. Now, if Simmel cares so much about individuals, what happens if social forms become objective, existing independently of people? Mead sees symbols as subjective because their meanings come from social interactions, which is different from Simmel because he suggests that symbols and social forms can have their own existence and influence. This raises the question, how does this objective culture affect individuals? According to Guy Oakes, recognizing this objectivity was a huge deal in Western cultural history. And now for subjective and objective cultures, Simmel identified two main types of culture. Ito nga yung subjective and objective. Sa definition niya, yung subjective culture daw ay personal. Sabi niya, it is like having a special incense for creating pictures that could symbolize a relationship or even rituals. Bali, closely related ito sa individual experiences. Objective culture, on the other side, is known to be separated from individuals and somehow forms its own experiences or existence. Dagdag pa dito, maaari din tayong maimpluwensyahan ng objective culture without us realizing it. For example, is how many of us believe in democracy without really engaging with its core values. Objective culture expands as our society grows and become more complex. Three factors were identified by Simmel that contribute to this. First is size, second is diversity, and lastly, complexity. For instance, the sheer amount of cultural material in the modern world is mind-boggling, with the volume increasing every year. Similarly, different cultural elements become more linked, making culture more complex. Simmel warned that if cultural forms become too detached from our individual lives, it could possibly create a space or gap between personal experience and culture, possibly affecting social interactions as well. In an ideal situation, there is a close connection between the two, but as culture becomes more objective, it gains its own autonomy, potentially overshadowing individual creativity. Lastly, para mas lalo natin maintindihan, itong diagram na ito ay nagpapakita ng relationship between subjective and objective culture. What we see on the far left is probably what Simmel has in mind under ideal conditions. Kailangan ng tao ng culture to interact with others, and in small traditional communities, the culture can be kept graspable and thus subjective. Yung double-headed arrows naman ay nag-i-indicate ng reciprocal relations. Subjective culture influences and is affected by people and interactions. And that is for the individual in society and subjective and objective culture as well. Now, magpo-proceed na tayo sa last part ng aming report, which is yung the self in the city na i-discuss ni Miss Divine Magallon.
Yes, Divine, and now let us explore another concept and idea of George Simmel's The Self in the City. Now, in this part, we will be exploring on the ideas expressed as the elements of modernity, kung saan ito yung mga specific characteristics ng isang modern age na nag increase ng objective culture but nagdi-decrease naman siya ng isang subjective culture. And ang primary concern ni Simmel sa part na to is yung epekto ng mga characteristics na to sa individual's personal experience of the self. And meron tayong three interrelated forces ng modernity, which are the urbanization, the division of labor, and the use of money and markets na nag-i-increase ng objective culture. Now, urbanization appears to be the principal dynamics na nag-increase ng level of division of labor and the extent that money markets are being used. And also, we must take note that urbanization can change or changes one's web of affiliation from a dense primary network to a loose secondary one. At sa part na to, makikita natin na naniniwala si Simmel sa social processes na nagdudulot ng conflicting effects in different aspects.
Now, alam naman na natin that urbanization is a process, or it is the movement of people from the rural areas into city or the urbans. And this urbanization is a factor behind yung tinatawag nating objective spirit, and also a major factor in the creation of the modern era. Now, this urbanization created three other factors. These are the increasing division of labor, the expanding use of money and markets, and also the greater ratio of rational to organic group membership. Ngayon, i-discuss naman natin yung division of labor. Historically, nagkaroon ng urbanization because of industrialization, and as a result of industrial revolution, nabago yung economic base ng society and also yung means or yung paraan kung paano mamuhay yung mga tao. And as population became increasingly concentrated sa isang lugar, kinakailangan ng mas effective na means para ma-provide yung necessities ng mga tao and also para ma-organize yung labor. Now, this increase in the division of labor happened para magkaroon ng mas mabilis na production and also para makontrol yung workforce. Now, Simmel argues that the division of labor also increases because of worker-entrepreneur innovation. And he also mentioned that the concentration of individuals in their struggle for customers compel or oblige them to specialize in a function from which they cannot be readily displaced by other worker. Now, this division of labor demands an ever more one-sided accomplishment dahil we tend to become specialized and concerned with smaller and smaller elements of the production process. And this one-sidedness, nag-create siya ng objective culture. So, we are unable to grasp the whole of the product and the production process also dahil nagfo-focus lang tayo or nag-work lang tayo doon sa small part. And sabi dito ni Simmel, the worker in a highly specialized division of labor becomes a mere cog in an enormous organization of the things and powers which tear from his hands all progress, all spirituality, and value in order to transform them from their subjective form into the form of purely objective life. Now, Simmel claims that the consumption of products thus produced has a trivializing effects. Kung mapapansin natin, this is basically the same issue with Marx was concerned, kung saan yung commodities na napoproduce in modern economies, they have little meaning. Tracing back the history, before modernity, most products were handmade, gawa sa kamay, and they have very clear meanings to groups, to individuals na gumawa ng mga product na yon, and they were usually embedded in socially reciprocal relations of gift-giving and support and also lineage. kung mapapansin natin, pwede pa naman, kaya pa naman gawin. And we can still accomplish that today by giving handmaiden gifts or sa paraan ng pagtuturo, pagpapasa ng katuruan sa ibang mga generations. But it isn't what characterizes our world now, especially in this modernizing world. And using such trivialized or empty commodities has an alienating effect on the person, according to Marx and Simmel. And both the level of specialization and the commodification that come from high divisions of labor creates a higher level of objective culture. Ngayon, i-discuss naman natin kung ano yung money and markets. Now, urbanization also increases the level of exchange in a society and also the use of money-facilitated markets. And kung titingnan natin, kung isipin natin yung presence ng money sa society, kailangan na maintindihan natin yung kung ano yung bartering. Now, ano ba yung bartering? Sa simple terms, ang bartering is the exchange or palitan ng produkto. So, bartering is the exchange of goods or services for other goods or services. And in barter system, walang sinusunod na universal value. And everything is equated on item-to-item basis kung saan lahat ng items, they are equally real. Kung halimbawa, mayroon kang isang supot ng kamatis, pwede mo siyang ipalit sa isang supot ng sibuyas. Or yung isang supot ng kamatis mo, pwede mong ipalit sa isang pirasong isda. So, the value of a product or service can vary tremendously at nakadepende ito sa local conditions or the subjective state ng trader. Dito na nga pumapasok yung money, with which money creates the universal value system wherein every commodity can be understood. And yung value system na to ay abstract and it has no intrinsic worth. And para magkaroon ng, para mag-stand siya for everything, it must have no value in itself. The money itself must have no value. And the universal and abstract nature ng money, ito yung nag-free sa kanya from constraint and it facilitate exchanges. Pero meron tong another effect for both the individual and the society. And as exchanges move from a barter type to a universal medium of exchange, ito na nga yung pera, the use of money increases. And also, commodification is another factor na nag-i-increase ng use of money, with which commodification increases the number and frequency of exchanges, and as a result, the use of money increases. Also, we must keep in mind that when someone like Simmel uses the term money, he's referencing something more general than what we normally think of as money. And as we have mentioned earlier, that money is the universal medium of exchange. Such things as money markets and stock futures increases the use of money in society. Ngayon, titingnan naman natin kung ano yung effects ng money. And one effect is that money increases individual freedom by allowing people to pursue diverse activities. Halimbawa, magbabayad ka to join a dance club or to join a gym or to go swimming. And also, by increasing the options for self-expression. Halimbawa, you want to look like a professional, so you will buy clothes, you will buy other accessories para magmukha kang professional, and you want to express yourself by dyeing your hair, so you will buy or you will go to salon, something like that. And the second effect is that even though we are able to buy more things which to express and experience ourselves, we are less attached to those things because of money, and we tend to understand and experience our possessions less in terms of intrinsic qualities and more of in terms of their objective and abstract worth. So halimbawa, bumili ka ng isang gamit, for example, isang iPhone. Bumili ka ng iPhone 12 because yun lang yung nakayanan ng sweldo mo. So, you value that iPhone based on the money it cost you to buy that thing, and also based on the difficulty kung paano mo siya mapapalitan in terms of money. And kapag nagkaroon ka na ng mas malaking halaga, nakapag-save ka na ng mas mataas or mas maraming pera, bumababa na yung value ng iPhone na nabili mo, because you can buy much higher version or model ng bagay na yon. So, our connection to those things becomes more weaker and objective rather than emotional due to the use of money. Third, money discourages intimate ties with people, and part of this is due to the universal nature ng money because of its all-inclusive character. Money comes to stand in place of almost everything, and yung epekto nito kumakalat kasi kung titingnan natin, when money was first introduced, only certain goods and services were seen as equivalent to money. Pero ngayon, makikita natin na halos lahat ng bagay ay may equivalent na halaga sa money. And that also includes relationship. So, money further discourages intimate ties by encouraging culture of calculation, and it tends to make us calculate and objectify also our relationship. So, all exchanges requires a degree of calculation, katulad na lang din sa bartering. But the use of money increases the number and yung speed of exchanges. So, money is the universal value system in modernity, and as it is used more and more to assess the world becomes increasingly quantified. So, fourth effect of money, it decreases moral constraints and increases anomy. So, money is an amoral value system. Anong ibig sabihin nito? That there are no morals implied in money. So, money is simply a means of exchange or a way of making exchanges go easier, kung saan money knows no good or evil. Pwede mong gamitin sa mabuti, pwede mong gamitin sa masama. Halimbawa, pwede kang bumili ng barel to kill someone, or pwede ka namang bumili ng pagkain para ibigay sa mga nagugutom. So, we can use money for good or for evil because there were no morals implied in money. So, as more and more of our lives are understood in terms of money, mas nababawasan naman yung moral basis natin. So, because moral constraints are produced only through group interactions, when money is used para mag-facilitate ng group membership, nababawasan yung true social nature ng isang grupo, and also yung ability niya na mag-produce ng morality. So, money has both positive and negative consequences for the individual. Money increases our options for self-expression, and inaalaw nito na ma-pursue yung diverse activities, but it also distances the individual from the objects and the people, and it increases the possibility of anomy. There are also four effects of money for the society. Number one is the use of money that creates exchange, relationships that covers a greater distances and last longer periods of time that would otherwise be possible. Halimbawa ay yung paggamit ng credit cards that we can use those on different places. And halimbawa din ay yung OFW that they can send their money to their families from abroad. And another one is that money also increases continuity among groups or the levels of cultural and social homogeneity. And the money strengthens the level of trust in a society. And lastly, behind this trust is the existence of a centralized state. And in order for us to trust in a money, we must trust in the authority of a single nation. Halimbawa ay yung dollars or the US dollars, hindi lang natin tinitignan yung papel but the imprinted image na nagsisimbolize sa isang nation. And when markets started using money for exchange, they were inadvertently pushing for the existence of a strong nation state. Now we will delve into the social networks, the rational versus organic group membership, and as a further result ng urbanization, Simmel argues that the social networks o yung tinatawag na web of group affiliations ay nagbago. And kapag nag-uusapan natin ng social networks, ngayon, ang naiisip natin ay yung numbers and the types of people na naa-associate natin and also the connection that we had among and between those people. Now, network theory is an established part of contemporary sociology at isa si Simmel na nakaisip ng term na yon. And he characterizes two types of social networks. One is organic and the other one is rational. And we'll first consider the organic social networks. Ito yung typical na small, more rural towns and settings. Now, Simmel uses the term organic to imply that this sort of groups, itong group networks na to, they occur naturally. Kumbaga, they come about and develop in a way na pag-grow ng isang plant or isang animal. In a small rural setting, there are relatively few groups for people to join, and most of those membership are strongly influenced by family. Kumbaga, nagjo-join tayo sa isang group dahil yung members ng family natin ay part din ng group na yon. And in this social setting, yung family, yung primary structure for social organizations. Now, Simmel notes that people in these settings tend to join groups because of organic motivation, because they are naturally or organically connected to the group. And many of the groups with which a person affiliates in these settings are primary groups. Sinabi nating primary groups, ito ay noteworthy dahil nakabase ito sa ties ng affection and personal loyalty, and it endures over long periods of time, and also it involves multiple aspects of a person's life. Now, under ng organic conditions, a person will usually be involved with mostly primary groups, and these groups have some association with one another. Now, this kind of community will contain people who are very much alike. Like, halimbawa, parehas sila ng paniniwala sa religion, parehas sila ng activities, and so on. And they will draw from the same basic group ng influences and culture, and the groups will magkakaroon sila ng compelling ability to sanction a behavior and bring about conformity. Sa kabilang banda naman, people join groups in modern urban settings out of rational motivations. Pag sinabi nating rational motivations, the group membership occurs due to freedom of choice. And it is important for us to take note the term freedom ay forced on the individual, or there are few organic connections. Halimbawa, sa large cities, kung saan people do not have much family around, hindi nila kasama yung family nila, or yung family nila is nasa ibang lugar. So, they have a weak connections with one another, and yung mga kapitbahay nila is nakikilala lang nila by sight dahil lagi nilang nakikita. And yung majority ng interactions nila ay work-related. It means that people join social groups out of choice or yung tinatawag na rational reasons rather than out of some emotional and organic connectedness. Now, this kind of groups tend to have the characteristics ng tinatawag nating secondary groups, in which it focuses on goals and utilitarian-oriented with a narrow range of activities over limited time spans. Now, yung result ng rational group affiliation ay nagda-develop ng unique personalities ng isang individual. At sa point of unisimal, the group's ability to function ay nakabase sa dependency ng isang individual sa grupo. And kapag merong few groups na pamimilian, then yung individuals in a collective are more dependent doon sa mga grupo na yon, and yung grupo na yon magkakaroon siya ng ability to demand conformity. Now, this power is evident na makikita natin sa mga traditional societies kung saan kapag na-ostracize ka sa isang society, it also means death, something like that. And of course, sa kabilang banda naman, the greater number of groups from which to choose, or yung mas maraming pamimilian, and the more diverse the group, nagkakaroon ng mas mababang moral boundaries and normative specificity. Sinabi natin normative specificity, it is the level of behaviors that are guided by norms, and in turn, nababawasan yung sanctioning ng power na lead sa individual ng greater freedom of expression. Isang halimbawa nito ay yung isang estudyante from malayong lugar na nag-aral sa isang university sa city, and they are able to express themselves more freely nung nakaalis na sila sa kanilang tahanan. Nadi-diminish yung students' childhood groups, halimbawa yung family, yung peers, or yung church, and many more groups na pamimilian. And these groups often have little to do with one another. Now, kapag ang grupo nagkaroon ng nag-demand ng maraming time or emotion or behavior, kayang-kaya mong mag-switch into another group. Nararanasan natin ang ganitong situations as a unique individual having choices, pero it has little thing to do with our individuality, but it is a function of the structure of our networks. And while decreased moral boundaries and normative specificity na naglilid sa greater freedom ng expression, they can also produce anomie. Ito din yung concern ni Emil Durkheim. And para sa isang individual, ang anomie, it speaks of a condition of confusion and meaningless. And when a group regulation is diminished or gone, it is easily for people to become confused and chaotic in their thoughts and emotions. Kumbaga, yung mga bagay sa buhay natin or yung buhay natin mismo ay nawawalan ng meaning. So, while we may think that personal freedom is a great idea, too much freedom can be disastrous. Mayroong two more consequences ang isang complex web of group affiliations. Una, they can increase the level of role conflict that a person experiences. At pangalawa, they contribute to the so-called blasé attitude. So, ano nga ba yung role conflicts? Role conflicts, it describes a situation in which the demands of two or more of the roles of a person occupies clash with one another. Halimbawa, niyaya ka ngayon ng iyong kaibigan to have a night party, but then kinabukasan ay mayroon kang naka-schedule na exam at 7 a.m. So, yung roles mo, they tend to clash with one another. And the greater number of groups with which one affiliates, mas mataas din yung numbers ng divergent roles and yung possibility na magkaroon ng role conflict. Now, yung mga modern groups, iniiwasan nila na magkaroon ng same member, and sinasakatuparan nila na magkaroon ng gathering at different times and different locations para maiwasan yung conflict ng mga roles. Now, i-discuss naman natin kung ano yung blasé attitude. So, the complex group structures also contribute to the blasé attitude, in which it is an attitude of the absolute boredom and lack of concern. So, every social group na kinabibilangan natin, nagdedemand ito ng emotional work or commitment. Pero, mayroon kasing limit yung emotional resources natin. So, we can only give so much and care so much at certain point. There is then yung kind of inverse relationship between our capacity to invest emotionally in our groups, and also yung number of different groups na pwede nating salihan. So, habang tumataas or dumadami yung social groups na kinabibilangan natin, yung ability naman natin na mag-invest emotionally ay bumababa. And this contributes to a blasé attitude, but it also makes conflict among groups dahil yung mga members, they tend to care less and less about the group's goals and standards. So, blasé attitude is also produced by all na nabanggit natin kanina, as well as the overstimulation and rapid change. So, habang tayo ay naglalakad sa isang daan or isang kalsada, marami tayong nakakasalamuhang mga tao, circumstances na kailangan nating i-take or kailangan nating i-evaluate or kailangan nating mag-react. And in our pursuit of individuality, nag-i-increase din yung level ng stimulation sa ating mga buhay. And as we go from one group to another, from one concert to another, from one movie to another movie, nagkakaroon tayo ng bombarding, nabobombard yung ating mga sarili with emotional and intellectual stimulation. So, all this stimulation, nagpo-prove siya to be too much for us. And ang nangyayari, we emotionally withdraw from that. So, this stimulation is in a constant flux, hindi siya humihinto, tuloy-tuloy. So, the knowledge and culture are constantly changing. And the general culture of modernity is affected by changes in knowledge, yet cultural change also is fueled by ever-expanding capitalist markets and commodities and by mass medias. So, makikita natin dito yung picture ng Curie ni Simmels. And take note na nag-concentrate siya sa effects of urbanization on the individual. Na ganun din naman yung focus ni Simmel. Titignan mo, napaka-complex ng model and it may seem overwhelming, but then if you tend to look on each path, mas maintindihan mo na yung mga nakalagay dyan ay yun lang din yung na-discuss kanina, and you can also look backwards para makita kung saan nagmula yung mga bagay na yun or kung saan patungo yung mga elements na nakalagay dyan. And take note that yung mga displays of difference nito, they came about because of 3 issues. Kung saan makikita natin dyan na the modern production creates commodities that are devoid of any substantial or stable meaning, and in order to sell them in mass markets, kailangan ng truly personal or group specific qualities na mag-bleach out ng mga products. So, Simmel argues that in the face of this, we feel compelled to exaggerate any differences that do exist in the things we use in order to stand out and experience our personal selves. So, the 2 other issues contributes to this felt need and an increasing sense of confusion and a meaningless or the blasé attitude and a feeling of lawlessness or the enemy. Now, according to Bowman, sinabi niya that to catch the attention, displays must be ever more bizarre, condensed, and disturbing, perhaps ever more brutal, gory, and threatening. Thus, it concludes that modernity increases our freedom of expression, but it also forces us to express it more dramatically with trivialized culture. And to sum it all up, Simmel's perspective highlights 2 central ideas. Una, yung social forms. Pangalawa, the relationship between the subjective experience of the individual and the objective culture. Now, he assumes that the individual is born with certain ways of thinking and feeling, and most social interactions are motivated by individual needs and desires. And also, the society is constituted by the social forms molded through encounters of individual with the society. And the objective culture na tinutukoy dito is one that is universal yet not entirely available to the individual's subjective experience. And urbanization, na katulad ng binanggit natin kanina, it increases the division of labor and the use of money, and it changes the configuration of social networks. And the use of money increases personal freedom for the individual, yet meron siyang dinudulot na kakaiba that intensifies the possibility of enemy. It diminishes the individual's attachment to the objects and increases goal displacement. And the rational motivations are prevalent to urban setting and imply greater personal freedom coupled with less emotional investment and possible enemy and role conflict. So, the organic motivations, on the other hand, imply less personal freedom and greater social conformity coupled with increased personal and social certainty. And that's all. Thank you.